It's the evening of April 15th, 1947, and down in the busy harbor of Texas City, a crew of longshoremen are finally wrapping up a grueling shift. Their workspace for the day is moored right here at the pier, a French cargo ship called the SS Grand Camp. Deep inside its hold sits a massive hull, roughly 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, packed tightly into thousands of heavy paper sacks. As the exhausted workers head home, someone makes a tiny, careless mistake. A still-lit cigarette slips through the bars of the ship's deck, tumbling directly into the cargo below. That single piece of discarded trash rests quietly in the dark. While the crew heads off to rest, a completely invisible threat begins to brew beneath the floorboards. Down in the pitch-black hold, the residual heat from the cigarette slowly warms the adjacent material, eventually causing the corner of one paper sack to curl and brown. This heat initiates a quiet chemical reaction. The ammonium nitrate inside the bag begins to slowly decompose, breaking down at the molecular level. Because the space is sealed off and completely unattended, there's nothing to interrupt the process. The internal temperature of the hold creeps up, degree by degree, hour after hour. While the entire surrounding city sleeps, a massive, self-sustaining chemical chain reaction is silently arming itself. Fast forward to 8 o'clock the next morning. That slow overnight decomposition has now turned into a highly visible problem, a billowing plume of bright orange smoke pouring out of the ship. The dock workers panic. They grab 2 standard fire extinguishers and empty them down the hatch, but the orange smoke just keeps rising. Seeing the rising threat, Captain Charles de Gilliborn issues a direct order: batten down all the hatches and pump steam from the ship's boiler directly into the hold to smother the blaze. Meanwhile, the unusual colored smoke acts like a beacon. A crowd of over 500 curious spectators flocks to the shoreline to watch the spectacle unfold. The tragic irony of that morning is that the standard emergency protocols intended to save the Grand Camp were actively converting it into a massive bomb. Normal combustion requires external oxygen. Cut it off and the fire dies. But ammonium nitrate doesn't need outside air. Under intense heat, it releases its own oxygen. By sealing the hatches and pump pressure, by doing exactly what he was trained to do to put out a fire, he unknowingly engineered a massive, self-feeding pressure cooker. At exactly 9:12 a.m., the conditions inside the sealed hold hit a critical threshold, 300 degrees Celsius. At this specific temperature, ammonium nitrate stops slowly decomposing. It violently detonates. In a single millisecond, 2,300 tons of fertilizer violently converted into a rapidly expanding wall of superheated gas. The blast produced a fireball roughly 600 meters high, carrying about 1/10 the explosive force of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shockwave was so immense, it shredded 2 light aircraft flying overhead, while the displacement of water created a 4.5-meter tidal wave that surged forward, dragging onlookers out to sea. Looking at this aerial view, you see the absolute scale of destruction. The blast leveled the entire industrial grid and adjacent shoreline in seconds. The crowd that had gathered at the docks had no idea what they were standing next to. That gap in chemical knowledge turned a harbor spectacle into an inescapable mass casualty event. Texas City was left completely shattered. As you can see in this ground-level photograph of a skeletal building, the initial shockwave caused severe structural devastation, entirely wiping out the local volunteer fire department in the process. But the disaster wasn't finished. The immense force of that first explosion severed the moorings of another vessel just 600 feet away, the SS Highflyer. Adrift and burning from the debris, the Highflyer carried a fatal complication. Its cargo hold was also packed with ammonium nitrate. Because the first explosion had decimated the town's emergency responders, there was absolutely no one left to fight this new blaze. A second disaster was now growing, completely unchecked. 16 hours after the initial catastrophe, at 1:10 a.m. on April 17th, the fire reached the cargo. The Highflyer detonated. The secondary shockwave tore through whatever remained. Looking at this photograph of destroyed homes and a battered church, the sheer civilian cost of the dual explosions becomes devastatingly clear. When the smoke finally cleared, at least 581 people had lost their lives. Pause for effect. A massive industrial port was reduced to rubble, all because a microscopic chemical reaction was quietly sparked by a single discarded cigarette.